Welcome to Explore, Explain, Highlights. In this highlights package, we'll be looking at Season 4, Episode 3, with our guest, Steph Bradley, discussing the project, The Travelling June Bug.
Your grandmother wrote 11 diaries to document her adventures across all 7 continents over 30 years. That's already a lot of stuff to work with. And just taking the example of travel diary number 3, which is a 150-page handwritten journal about a solo 3-week trip across Europe in 1982. And then you've got 64 travel-related items found in the suitcase. You've got your grandmother's own photographs that she took, and I know there were lots of those. And then also some tape recordings, so audio material to work with. I mean, how did you? I'm just imagining sort of all this sort of spread across a huge table. Where did you start with all this? Did you just read some diaries and just wait for some things to form, some synthesis of an idea to form? And yeah, you can speak to that. How did you kind of combat all this material?
Yeah, I absolutely started with reading the
Right.
diaries and transcribing them, and was looking for, what consistencies did she have throughout the diaries? Was there something that she always wrote about? Was there a consistency in how she formatted her diary?
Okay. So sorry to interrupt, but almost like an analysis of your grandmother's diarization process. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the audio and the photos speak to that as well.
Mm.
Starting with her 4th diary, she took a tape recorder with her everywhere that she went during her, excursions during the day. And that was so that she could include more detail when she would then go home or, go to the hotel at night and write about that day's adventures. So once she started doing that, there was a whole lot more detail, even in some of the beginning ones. And so I was just trying to look for some of those consistencies in the formatting, and pinpoint too, because she was so interested in the details. She names every single thing that she visited. So
Right.
she went and saw, if she went to a museum, or if she went to a couple of museums that day, she would name each of them and what she saw in each of them. And there's just so much detail. And so I tried to capture all of that as well. And so that is really where I started. And then she
Yeah.
also references the photos in the diaries. So she'll say, oh, I took photos here.
Mm, mm.
You can really match that up. Whereas, like you said, with kind of our current culture of I don't do anything during the day and I've somehow taken 4 photos. Like I'm not noting when I take
Yeah.
photos, but
Yeah.
she carried a camera with her, and film was expensive, and it was expensive to get it developed. And so she was very intentional about the
Yeah.
photos she took and the things that she wrote down.
I also wondered, to what extent you had to sort of have a mindset of not just listening to this stuff as a granddaughter and really enjoying listening to your grandmother talk and just, right, head back in the game. This is a project that I have to kind of quantify and codify these things. I mean, was that a struggle? Once you kind of got into the flow of it, were you quite sort of focused on, right, this is what I want to get out of this?
It wasn't too much of a struggle. I read each diary before I started working on them.
Sure.
So I would kind of read through it in a way that I'd be able to enjoy it as a granddaughter and
Yeah.
have all the feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I would kind of go back and do the transcription. That's also would just give me a good idea of what I would find. But I really did read it for pleasure first,
Sure.
and then went back. And so I didn't, have too. I think probably the thing that I would just get the most distracted by was just how like beautiful and like delicate everything was.
Mm,
It's hard to like read through these diaries and not appreciate the craftsmanship that went
mm,
into them. And
mm.
then, my brain is going off on some tangent of like, when have I ever done something this beautiful? Like, she was amazing.
Well, I think the project itself captures that, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. But I think one of the things I also noted in one of your commentaries was you sort of also set off looking at the diaries, and you seem to be expecting at least to be maybe working more towards a trip-based dissection of what was captured. And then you said sort of things like, capturing how long she spent on this trip and how far she went on that trip. But there was also then moments that you encountered of maybe some gaps or things that didn't sort of complete a trip in a very sort of linear sense. And I wondered if those moments were, I guess, helpful to just sort of push you towards what you ended up doing, or if at the time you felt, if only I had that thing, then that would make this pathway viable.
I'm sure that I had that thought quite a few times. I can't really remember any
Mm,
specifics, but um, something that really helped with kind of wrapping my head around that was conversations with my family, with my aunts
right.
in particular. I had this idea in the beginning that I'd be able to compare the trips to each other and look at the number of days traveled,
Mm,
how much did she write in on this trip versus this trip. And I was talking to one of my aunts, and she, asking her about what she remembered from, what was her experience of her mother going on these
sure.
fabulous trips when she was younger. And she said that my grandmother had spent so much time planning them. She loved planning them, and
Mm,
each trip was the trip of a lifetime. And so it wasn't they weren't something that could be compared to one another.
I see.
Each each trip was really like an evolution. It was the next step. It wasn't an iteration of a previous trip.
Yeah.
There were a couple of times when she would mention something like that. Like in her third diary, she literally wrote, "Next time I should bring a tape recorder." So that, and then
Right.
she did. So
Yeah.
there were a couple of like through lines like that, but because they were unique, and it was always the trip of a lifetime.
Mm.
It was easy enough to move past that idea.
Talking now about the photographs, because as I said, I do see this as it's an asset that you're using and you're sort of extracting and taking. And what really struck me about the project was the beauty, the elegance, but the consistency and the very evident care and attention to detail of photographing these items, whether it's the angle, the lighting, the shadows, the distance from the object. I mean, first of all, do you have previous experience photographing to this level of quality? And if not, well done. But just sort of talk me through the mechanics of how you sort of set these photographs in motion, how you accomplish them.
Yeah, it's that's very nice of you to say that, that marking the consistency, because I really just took them with my iPhone. I
Wow.
started and I was like, okay, I'll get some content up there so that I have photographs to use, and then I'll retake them in some fancier way later.
Right.
And all of them are just my original little iPhone snaps. So I did have I basically placed them on each item on a white poster board so that it didn't have anything behind it.
Yeah.
And I would kind of move them around my apartment based on the time of day. There were a couple days I think where it was too stormy, or it wasn't natural light, and
Right.
so I was doing these ones tomorrow. But no, those were all just done with my iPhone.
Well, that's not a bad advert for the iPhone, and other phones are available out there, of course. I mean, yeah, as I said, the quality of the photographs is is perfect, and I mean quality in two respects. You know, the quality in a technical sense, but also just the design quality and the aesthetic. And I think it does move us on to the design stage and to think about the different contents that you've pulled together. And I think the first thing to remark on is the aesthetic quality, and it does have this sort of beautiful vintage, not quite sepia quality to it, but it's certainly non-primary colours. And so, although I tend to talk about colours later on, did you start off quite early trying to formulate your sense of the colour palette, the aesthetic, and then everything would follow thereafter?
Yeah, as I mentioned originally, the aesthetic started off with more hand-drawn illustrations, and I was still going to use photographs of the items, but they were going to play a smaller role. And my idea was kind of to do this like ultra digital, like monochrome illustrative.
Right.
And that is still reflected in some of like the icons. But when I decided to move to the photographs of the items and the diaries in particular, I really struggled with that color palette because most of the diaries are toned down in their own design. You know, they're kind of more muted colors, but there are a couple, like the one from when she went to Australia is this bright tropical fish. It's basically like, that one is ruining the aesthetic. So in an effort to just try to create a more cohesive aesthetic, I desaturated the images.
Right.
And decided to pull that through. So most of them are desaturated and have a little bit of a transparency. And then on the site, in most instances, when you're hovering over an item, it scales up. It comes to 100% opacity and saturation.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to be focused on an item to see it, which was also intentional because in my experience working with the suitcase itself, you mentioned earlier, you know, imagining having all of this like out on the table, and that was absolutely my life for 4 months, just explosion of items. And that's really how I felt about it. It all kind of looked like a blur.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what to look at because there's so much. And then when you pick up one piece, you can appreciate the detail. And
now, just sort of reflecting on some of the little design details. I love little design details, and I love things like the interactive little June bug, the little help thing. I mean, again, what was the? I mean, it's obvious where that came from, but what made you think actually that'll be my little device for on the spot help?
yeah, I kind of designed it. So the June bug it's a very recognizable icon to our family.
Sure.
My grandmother, because her nickname was Junebug, she used a ladybug stamp. I don't know if you've ever seen a Junebug, but they're not as cute as ladybugs.
Right.
So kind of like her insignia was a ladybug.
Right. Okay.
And she had a stamp that she would sign all of our birthday cards, any letters, anything with. And so it was just very recognizable. And so when I turned that into an icon, I just immediately was like, this is the best thing I've ever made. It's just so cute.
Yeah.
So it ended up being the little like helper bug. It's kind of the tooltip designation, and then like the favicon as well. So it's kind of the little mascot for the project.
Absolutely. And again, you mentioned earlier the illustrations, the hand drawings, and you know there are some that do make it in. So you spoke before about a lot that didn't. Are you tempted to bring any of those back in as you continue to evolve the sort of the site going forward?
With the illustrations, possibly. I'm glad I went with the choice of doing the photographs for the most part. But I do have a couple of pieces already made, especially when it comes to kind of the summation of the statistics, kind of comparing, you know, if you look at I think it's on the timeline page. If you scroll down on that page a little bit, it shows the collected statistics. And so I do have a couple of illustrations around like, okay, you know, throughout all these diaries, she wrote this many words. That's about the same as this novel, you know, something
Yeah.
recognized. So, or like the number of miles that she traveled is this many times around the globe. So I do have some illustrations that I might bring back in around that. And yeah, who knows what direction it'll take next. I got a lot of really great feedback. Something really early on, a bit of feedback that I still kind of relish was, because this was exactly my intention. One of my favorite pieces is just that homepage visualization of the suitcase floating in. One of my classmates said that he could like hear the latches click open.
Nice, yeah.
He hovered over and I was like, yes, that's exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
So that for me was very, very validating. And it's such a great sound too.
Yes.
And so that was really good feedback. And yeah, I mean, my family is very, very excited that it exists, very appreciative and excited to see the rest of it.
Thank you for joining us for this Explore, Explain highlights episode. As always, the full episode is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. We hope to see you again soon on another episode of Explore, Explain.